By early 1944, the Allied invasion of Western Europe was no longer a question of if, but how many would die when it happened. For nearly 4 years, Nazi Germany had transformed the European coastline into a fortress. From Norway to the Bay of Biscay, concrete bunkers, artillery emplacements, minefields, and barbed wire stretched across thousands of kilometers. This vast defensive system was known collectively as the Atlantic Wall. On paper, it was impregnable. In reality, it was uneven, overstretched, and dangerously dependent on German assumptions about where the enemy would land. That weakness would decide the war, but only if the Allies could exploit it. The strategic problem facing the Allies. Operation Overlord, the Allied plan to invade Nazi-occupied France, was the largest amphibious assault ever attempted. More than 150,000 troops would land in a single day. Thousands of ships would cross the English Channel. Tens of thousands of vehicles, artillery pieces, and tons of supplies would follow. If the Germans correctly identified the main landing site and reacted quickly, the invasion could be crushed on the beaches. This was not speculation. Allied planners studied the disaster at Dieppe in 1942, where a smaller raid had ended in catastrophe. German coastal defenses, supported by mobile reserves, had inflicted devastating losses in just a few hours. Normandy would be far larger. Failure there would not simply delay liberation. It could collapse Allied morale, prolong the war by years, and strengthen Hitler's grip on Europe. The invasion could not be allowed to fail. The German defensive reality in 1944. Contrary to post-war myths, Germany was not defenseless in France. In early 1944, roughly 58 German divisions were stationed in Western Europe. While many were under strength or composed of older conscripts, several elite formations remained combat-ready, including powerful panzer divisions equipped with tanks capable of destroying Allied armor at close range. These armored reserves were the real danger. Static defenses could be breached. Beaches could be stormed. But if German panzer divisions counterattacked the beachheads before the Allies could establish supply lines, the invasion would be strangled at birth. German doctrine emphasized exactly this response. Allow the enemy to land, then annihilate them with concentrated mobile forces before they could consolidate. The success or failure of D-Day depended on one question. Where would those panzer divisions be when the invasion began? Normandy was not the obvious choice. From the German perspective, Normandy made little sense. The shortest route across the English Channel lies between Dover and Calais. This area, known as the Pas de Calais, offered several advantages to an attacker. The narrowest crossing, proximity to major ports, direct routes toward Germany's industrial heartland. German planners believed, with sound military logic, that this would be the primary invasion site. Normandy, by contrast, appeared less attractive. Its beaches were wide but lacked major ports. The terrain inland was dominated by hedgerows, ideal for defense. Supply lines would be long and vulnerable. If the Allies landed there, they would need time to build artificial harbors and expand outward under constant pressure. That apparent weakness was precisely why Normandy was chosen, but choice alone was not enough. The Germans had to believe Normandy was not the real target, Hitler's command structure, and a critical vulnerability. German defensive planning in the West suffered from a fatal flaw: centralized decision-making. Ultimate authority rested with Adolf Hitler. He retained personal control over the release of armored reserves. Field commanders could not move panzer divisions without explicit approval from the highest level. This rigidity created opportunity. If Hitler and the German high command could be convinced that the Normandy landings were a diversion, they would hesitate. They would wait. They would hold their strongest forces in reserve, expecting the real invasion elsewhere. In modern warfare, hesitation is lethal. The Allies understood this. They did not need to hide the invasion entirely. That was impossible. Instead, they needed to misdirect German attention at the decisive moment. They needed the enemy to look in the wrong direction. Deception as a weapon of war. By 1944, British intelligence had already learned a crucial lesson. Deception worked best when it reinforced what the enemy already believed. The Germans believed the Pas de Calais was the logical invasion point. They believed the Allies would use their most aggressive commander to lead the main assault. They believed that a large invasion force could not be concealed indefinitely. All of these beliefs could be exploited. Rather than inventing an entirely false narrative, Allied planners would build a parallel reality, one that appeared consistent, rational, and increasingly convincing over time, a reality supported by radio traffic, troop movements, and trusted intelligence sources feeding directly into German hands. This was not a single trick. It was a sustained psychological operation. Its purpose was simple: delay the German response, not by hours, but by days. Those days would determine whether Allied soldiers survived the beaches of Normandy or died under German counterattacks before they could dig in. The stakes could not be higher. If deception failed, panzer divisions could reach Normandy within 24, 48 hours. Beachheads could be overrun before reinforcements arrived. The invasion could collapse under its own weight. If deception succeeded, German reserves would remain immobilized. The Allies would gain precious time to build strength. Normandy would become irreversible. The invasion of Europe was not won by courage alone. It would be won by controlling what the enemy believed. And to do that, the Allies prepared the greatest military deception operation in history. It was called Operation Fortitude. By 1943, the Allies no longer debated whether deception was useful. That argument had already been settled in blood. British intelligence had spent the early years of the war improvising. Some deceptions worked, many failed. But one lesson emerged with brutal clarity: deception only succeeded when it was systematic, centralized, and rooted in the enemy's own assumptions. Ad hoc tricks were not enough. If the invasion of Europe was to succeed, deception had to be elevated from clever misdirection to strategic doctrine. Operation Bodyguard, the umbrella plan. Operation Fortitude did not exist in isolation. It was part of a far larger framework known as Operation Bodyguard, the overarching Allied deception strategy designed to protect the true timing and location of the Normandy invasion. The logic behind Bodyguard was blunt. Just as a bodyguard shields a principal figure from harm, deception would shield Operation Overlord from German detection and reaction. Bodyguard had three core objectives: conceal the exact date of the invasion, confuse the enemy about the scale of Allied forces, mislead German command about the true landing site. Fortitude was the most important component of this plan, but not the only one. Smaller deception efforts targeted Norway, southern France, and even the Balkans. Each served a purpose. But Fortitude carried the main weight, because Fortitude targeted the German decision-making center itself. Why Fortitude needed to exist? By late 1943, German intelligence had already concluded several uncomfortable truths. An Allied invasion of Western Europe was inevitable. Britain was the staging ground. The attack would come in 1944. What they did not know was where. That uncertainty was the opening the Allies needed. German planners could defend many places poorly, or a few places well. They chose the latter. The Pas de Calais became the centerpiece of their defensive logic. Fortitude's mission was not to invent a fake invasion. Its mission was to confirm German expectations and lock them in place. The London Controlling Section. At the heart of this operation sat a small, secretive organization, the London Controlling Section LCS. The LCS was responsible for coordinating deception across all Allied services. It did not run spies directly. It did not command troops. Its power lay elsewhere. It controlled the narrative. The LCS decided what the Germans should believe, when they should believe it, which channels would reinforce that belief. By 1944, deception was no longer reactive. It was scripted months in advance. Every false radio signal, every staged troop movement, every planted rumor served a timeline. Fortitude was not one lie. It was hundreds of small, mutually reinforcing lies, told consistently over time. Fortitude divided north and south. Operation Fortitude was split into two parallel sub-operations. Fortitude North aimed to convince Germany that an Allied invasion of Norway was imminent. Fortitude South focused on the Pas de Calais, the real strategic prize. The Northern Deception was designed to pin German forces in Scandinavia. It worked moderately well, but its importance was secondary. Fortitude South was the decisive effort. Its goal was explicit: persuade the German High Command that the main Allied invasion force was assembling opposite Calais, and that Normandy, if attacked at all, would be a diversion. Everything else flowed from this objective. Why Calais was the perfect lie. The genius of Fortitude South lay in restraint. Rather than constructing an elaborate fantasy, Allied planners anchored their deception in reality. Calais was the shortest route. Calais did offer better port access. Calais did align with German expectations. This mattered. Deception that contradicts logic fails. Deception that reinforces logic becomes indistinguishable from truth. Fortitude South would not claim something outrageous. It would quietly insist on what the Germans already believed, then provide evidence to support it. Choosing the right face for the lie. One decision proved especially important. If there was to be a main Allied invasion force aimed at Calais, it needed a commander whose reputation made sense. That commander was George S. Patton. From the German perspective, Patton was the most aggressive and dangerous Allied general. His reputation for armored warfare was well known. German intelligence expected him to lead the decisive blow. The Allies exploited this expectation mercilessly. Patton was publicly sidelined after incidents in Sicily, but his visibility did not disappear. On the contrary, it increased. He was placed conspicuously in southeastern England, exactly where a Calais invasion force would assemble. To German eyes, this was confirmation, not coincidence. The deception infrastructure takes shape. By early 1944, Fortitude South had become a living system. It included entire phantom formations listed in Allied order of battle documents, fake headquarters emitting radio traffic consistent with real units, controlled leaks through double agents, physical decoys designed to be spotted by aerial reconnaissance. Crucially, these elements did not appear overnight. They emerged gradually. German intelligence observed the buildup of forces opposite Calais over weeks and months. That slow accumulation mirrored how a real invasion force would assemble. It felt authentic because it followed real military logic. By the time Normandy loomed, Fortitude South was no longer a theory. To the Germans, it was simply the most reasonable explanation for what they were seeing, a lie that had to survive contact with reality. The ultimate challenge facing Fortitude was not creating belief. It was sustaining belief after the invasion began. If German commanders immediately recognized Normandy as the main effort, Fortitude would collapse in hours. The deception had to continue after D-Day, reinforcing the idea that Normandy was only the opening move. This required extraordinary discipline. Even as Allied troops fought and died on the beaches, the deception machinery would continue operating. Messages would still be sent. Fake units would still exist. Double agents would still report. The lie had to outlive the truth. Because once German panzer divisions moved, the opportunity was gone forever. Every successful deception operation depends on one thing above all else: trust. Not fear, not confusion, not ignorance. Trust earned slowly, reinforced carefully, and never wasted. By 1944, British intelligence possessed something the Germans did not realize they had already lost: control over their own intelligence network. The German intelligence failure no one noticed. Early in the war, German military intelligence, the Abwehr, had placed agents throughout Britain. Some arrived by submarine. Others parachuted in at night. Most were captured within days. Instead of executing or imprisoning them all, British counterintelligence made a calculated decision. They turned them. This became known as the double-cross system. By 1942, every known German agent operating in Britain was either neutralized or reporting under British control. By 1944, the Germans had no independent human intelligence left inside the United Kingdom. They did not know this, and that ignorance would decide the outcome of Operation Fortitude, the logic of the double-cross system. The strength of the system lay in restraint. British handlers understood that a double agent who always lied would be useless. Real credibility required truth mixed with falsehood, accuracy mixed with omission. Reports had to be plausible, occasionally helpful, and sometimes even damaging to Allied interests in minor ways. This built confidence. German intelligence files show repeated assessments, rating certain agents as reliable, highly reliable, or beyond doubt. These assessments would later be fatal. Fortitude was not fed to the Germans as a dramatic revelation. It was drip-fed, patiently, through voices they had trusted for years. The most important liar in the war. Among these agents, one stood above all others: Juan Pujol Garcia. Codenamed Garbo by the British, Pujol was not a trained spy when he began. He was a Spanish civilian with a deep personal hatred of fascism and an extraordinary capacity for imagination. Before British intelligence ever recruited him, Pujol had already begun deceiving the Germans on his own, inventing an entire network of fictitious sub-agents across Britain. He wrote reports describing ports he had never seen and factories he had never visited, using information pulled from public sources and careful logic. The Germans believed him. When British intelligence finally took control of Pujol, they realized what they had acquired. Not a single agent, but a narrative engine. Garbo's reports were detailed, consistent, and filled with mundane accuracy. He complained about travel delays. He mentioned weather. He included irrelevant personal observations. This texture made his intelligence feel real. By 1944, German handlers considered Garbo one of their most valuable assets, building the Fortitude narrative. Garbo did not suddenly announce a Calais invasion. Instead, he began to report gradual changes, increased troop movements in southeastern England, new units arriving but not yet ready, logistical congestion consistent with preparation, not execution. These reports aligned perfectly with what German aerial reconnaissance seemed to show. They also matched German expectations of how an invasion force would assemble. When Garbo reported delays, the Germans accepted them. When he warned of incomplete readiness, they nodded along. The lie grew organically, reinforcing the story with other voices. Garbo was not alone. Other controlled agents, including Roman Chernyavsky, known as Brutus, provided corroboration. Each agent told a slightly different version of the same story, tailored to their supposed location and access. This mattered. Independent confirmation is the gold standard of intelligence assessment. The Germans believed they were receiving it. In reality, all these streams flowed from the same British source. The system was airtight. Why the Germans never suspected the trap? It is tempting to portray German intelligence as incompetent. That would be inaccurate and lazy. The Abwehr suffered from structural weaknesses, but its officers were professionals. What defeated them was not stupidity, but confidence. The agents delivered results. Some warnings were accurate. Some intelligence led to successful German actions. Over time, skepticism faded. By the spring of 1944, German analysts did not ask whether these agents were reliable. They asked how much weight to give them. That distinction mattered. The critical days before D-Day. In the weeks leading up to June 6th, Garbo's reporting became more specific. He warned of an impending invasion, but emphasized that the main blow would come at the Pas de Calais. Normandy, if attacked, was described as a secondary operation designed to draw German forces away. This was the heart of Fortitude. On the night before D-Day, Garbo attempted to send a warning message to his German handlers. British intelligence deliberately delayed its delivery until after the landings had begun. This delay served two purposes. It preserved Garbo's credibility by showing he had tried to warn them. It reinforced the belief that Normandy was not the main effort. After the landings, Garbo sent follow-up messages confirming that the Calais invasion was still expected. The Germans believed him. Lie maintained after the truth was visible. Even as Allied troops fought their way inland in Normandy, German panzer divisions remained in reserve. German commanders hesitated. They waited for the second blow. They waited because their intelligence told them to wait. For weeks after D-Day, the German High Command continued to believe that the main Allied invasion had not yet occurred. Fortitude had not merely delayed reaction, it had frozen it. The double agents had done their job. Not with brilliance, not with drama, but with consistency. If deception ended with human intelligence, it would always remain fragile. Agents could be doubted. Messages could be intercepted incorrectly. A single confession under pressure could unravel months of work. Operation Fortitude needed something more durable. It needed physical proof. Not proof of truth, but proof of plausibility. The problem of scale. By early 1944, the Germans expected the Allies to field a massive invasion force. This was not paranoia, it was arithmetic. Britain was visibly overflowing with men and material. Ports were congested. Rail traffic was heavy. American divisions arrived continuously. An invasion force of that size could not be hidden completely. So the Allies made a decision that appears counterintuitive. They did not try to conceal everything. They chose instead to misallocate what could be seen, inventing an army. The centerpiece of Fortitude South was a formation that existed only on paper and in German minds. The 1st U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG. On Allied documents, FUSAG was a powerful force assembling in southeastern England. It included infantry divisions, armored units, airborne troops, and logistical support. Its mission was clear: invade the Pas-de-Calais. In reality, FUSAG did not exist, but everything about it looked real. Why appearance mattered more than substance? German intelligence relied heavily on aerial reconnaissance. They counted landing craft. They tracked vehicle parks. They photographed airfields. They mapped rail movements. Fortitude planners studied this obsessively. They asked a simple question: what does an army look like from the air? Then they built exactly that. Inflatable armor and wooden aircraft. The most famous elements of Fortitude were the decoys, inflatable tanks, trucks, artillery pieces, and even aircraft were deployed across southern England. From ground level, many of them were crude. From the air, at altitude, they were convincing enough. They cast the right shadows. They sat in logical formations. They appeared, moved slightly, then disappeared as units rotated. Crucially, they were placed where German reconnaissance expected them to be. This was not random camouflage. It was choreography, ghost units, and radio traffic. Physical decoys alone were not enough. Every real military unit emits radio signals, orders, reports, requests, complaints. Silence itself can be suspicious. So Fortitude created radio ghosts. Specialized signal units generated realistic radio traffic for formations that did not exist. The volume, structure, and rhythm of these transmissions matched known Allied practices. German signal intelligence intercepted this traffic and logged it carefully. On their maps, FUSAG grew stronger every week. Logistics, the detail, that sold the lie. The most convincing aspect of the fake army was not tanks or radios. It was logistics. FUSAG appeared to consume supplies at plausible rates. Fuel dumps appeared and vanished. Vehicle parks expanded. Engineers constructed camps, roads, and depots consistent with an army preparing for amphibious assault. These activities did not scream invasion tomorrow. They whispered almost ready. That distinction mattered. The commander everyone expected. No army exists without a commander. The Germans believed that the most aggressive Allied general would lead the main invasion. They had studied his campaigns in North Africa and Sicily. They feared his speed and his willingness to exploit breakthroughs. When German intelligence saw this commander publicly associated with southeastern England, it fit perfectly. This was confirmation bias weaponized. From the German point of view, it would have been irrational for the Allies to sideline such a commander for a secondary operation, so they didn't question it. A deception built to be discovered. One of Fortitude's most counterintuitive features was intentional visibility. The fake army was not hidden deep in forests or remote valleys. It was placed where German aircraft could find it. Reconnaissance flights were allowed, sometimes even encouraged. Each photograph taken by the Luftwaffe strengthened the illusion. Each report reinforced the same conclusion. The main Allied force was massing opposite Calais. The psychological weight of numbers. As weeks passed, German intelligence assessments grew more confident. Reports estimated the size of FUSAG. Analysts compared its strength to known Allied capabilities. The numbers made sense. This mattered enormously. If Normandy was the real invasion, Then why was this massive force still idle? The only logical answer was that Normandy was not decisive. That logic would paralyze German decision-making at the critical moment. When reality collided with the lie, on June 6, 1944, Allied troops landed in Normandy. The deception did not collapse. German commanders interpreted the landings through the framework Fortitude had built. Normandy was violent, costly, and dangerous, but it looked like exactly what the deception had predicted: a diversion. Fusog still existed. The main blow was still coming. And it would come at Calais, the cost of believing what you can see. For days, German armored divisions remained in place. For weeks, some units were never released. The fake army did not need to fight. It only needed to wait. Operation Fortitude did not succeed because the Germans lacked intelligence. It succeeded because they trusted the wrong conclusions. By 1944, German defensive planning in the West was shaped by a rigid hierarchy, entrenched assumptions, and a command system that punished initiative at the worst possible moment. At the center of this system sat a single point of failure: centralized control as strategic weakness. In theory, German command structure allowed flexibility. In practice, it did not. The release of armored reserves in France required approval from the highest level of command. Field commanders could observe, report, and request. They could not act independently. This decision-making bottleneck slowed response time and amplified uncertainty. Speed mattered more than perfection. The Germans sacrificed speed. The role of the OKW, the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, or Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, served as the nerve center of German strategic decision-making. By mid-1944, the OKW was drowning in data: aerial reconnaissance reports, signals intelligence, human intelligence from trusted agents, field reports from coastal commanders. The problem was not lack of information, it was interpretation, and Fortitude had already shaped how that interpretation would unfold. Why Calais made too much sense. From a purely military perspective, Calais remained the logical invasion site. German planners cited the shortest sea crossing, superior port facilities, direct routes into Belgium and Germany, historical invasion patterns. These were not irrational arguments. They were correct in isolation. Fortitude did not challenge this logic. It reinforced it. Every piece of deception fed into the same conclusion: Normandy was inconvenient, inefficient, and therefore unlikely to be decisive. Once that assumption hardened, all new intelligence was filtered through it. Conflicting signals and the choice to wait. On June 6th, reports from Normandy were alarming. German coastal defenses were under heavy assault. Air superiority had been lost. Allied forces were establishing beachheads. But elsewhere, nothing happened. The massive force opposite Calais did not move. Radio traffic continued. Double agents reported delays. Reconnaissance suggested readiness, not execution. This contradiction created paralysis. If Normandy was the main invasion, why was the strongest Allied force still idle? The answer, from the German perspective, was obvious. Normandy was not the main invasion: fear of acting too soon. German commanders faced a dilemma with catastrophic consequences. If they released armored reserves prematurely, they risked exposing Calais to the real invasion. They risked committing elite units to a secondary battlefield. They risked disobeying explicit orders. If they waited, Normandy might be contained. The decisive blow could be met later. Strategic coherence would be preserved. They chose to wait. This was not cowardice. It was obedience. Hitler's influence on delay. Hitler's personal involvement in operational decisions worsened the situation. He remained convinced that the decisive Allied attack would fall at Calais. His reasoning aligned perfectly with Fortitude's narrative. Requests to release panzer divisions were delayed, debated, and often denied outright. Hours passed, then days. In amphibious warfare, those units of time are decisive. The fatal consequence of belief. German armored units that could have counterattacked the Normandy beaches within 24 hours remained stationary. Some were held back for weeks. Others were released too late, moving under constant Allied air attack, arriving piecemeal and disorganized. The opportunity to crush the invasion at its most vulnerable moment was gone, not because the Germans lacked strength, but because they believed they needed it somewhere else. Intelligence that worked too well. From the German point of view, Fortitude was not a deception. It was confirmation. Their agents had warned them. Their reconnaissance had shown them. Their logic supported it. Every system agreed. That consensus was lethal. The greatest danger in intelligence is not being wrong. It is being confidently wrong. The obsession that could not be broken. Even after Normandy expanded, doubts persisted. German commanders continued to expect a second, larger landing at Calais. Defensive forces remained in place. Plans were held in reserve. Fortitude had outlived the invasion itself. The lie was no longer temporary. It had become structural. June 6, 1944, did not shatter Operation Fortitude. It validated it. That sounds absurd. An invasion involving thousands of ships, airborne landings, and 5 assault beaches should have destroyed any lingering doubt. It did not. Because Fortitude had been designed for this moment. The first German interpretation. When reports of the landings reached German headquarters in the early hours of June 6th, confusion was immediate. The scale was undeniable. Airborne troops were landing inland. Naval gunfire pounded the coast. Coastal divisions were under extreme pressure. But confusion does not equal clarity. German analysts did not ask whether an invasion was happening. That was obvious. They asked whether this was the invasion. Fortitude had already supplied an answer. Normandy as a diversion. In the Fortitude framework, Normandy fit perfectly as a diversionary landing. It was distant from Calais. It lacked major ports. Its terrain favored defense. Most importantly, it occurred while the supposed main invasion force remained inactive. That inactivity mattered more than the violence unfolding on the beaches. If the Allies were truly committing everything to Normandy, then the force opposite Calais should have moved. It did not. Radio traffic continued as before. Double agents confirmed delays. Reconnaissance showed no mass embarkation. To German eyes, this was not contradictory. It was consistent. The role of post-landing intelligence. In the days immediately following June 6th, controlled agents sent carefully crafted messages. They acknowledged the landings. They emphasized their secondary nature. They warned that the main blow was still expected in the Pas de Calais once conditions were favorable. This was the most dangerous phase of Fortitude. The lie could no longer exist independently of reality. It had to coexist with it. British intelligence understood that total denial would be implausible. Instead, they reframed the truth. Normandy was real, but it was not decisive. Delay is a weapon. The goal was no longer concealment. It was delay. Every hour German armored divisions remained in place increased Allied chances of survival. Every day allowed more men, vehicles, and supplies to come ashore. Fortitude success can be measured in time units. Time gained equals lives saved. The Panzer Dilemma. German commanders faced relentless pressure. Field reports from Normandy were grim. Casualties were mounting. Defensive lines were bending. Yet releasing armored reserves risked exposing Calais to what they still believed would be the main invasion. This was not theoretical. German planning documents repeatedly emphasized the danger of premature commitment. The memory of Allied deception operations elsewhere reinforced caution. Better to endure losses now than lose everything later. That calculation would prove fatal. Allied air power and the cost of delay. As days passed, German armored units that were eventually released faced a new reality. Allied air superiority made daylight movement hazardous. Roads were cratered. Bridges were destroyed. Units arrived late, fragmented, and exhausted. The window for a decisive counterattack had closed. Fortitude did not need to immobilize German forces forever. It only needed to hold them long enough. When doubt finally appeared. By mid-June, German confidence began to erode. The scale of Allied buildup in Normandy exceeded expectations. Artificial harbors appeared. Supply flow increased dramatically. But even then, Uncertainty persisted. The anticipated Calais landing did not materialize. Yet abandoning that expectation required overturning months of reinforced belief. Institutions do not change their minds quickly, especially under pressure. The deception outlives its purpose. Fortitude continued well into the summer of 1944. Fake units remained active. Radio traffic persisted. Intelligence channels stayed open. This persistence mattered. It prevented a sudden, coordinated German shift of forces even after Normandy's success became undeniable. The deception did not end on June 6th. It faded gradually, as all effective lies do. The moment that could not be recovered. There was a moment, measured in days, when the Normandy landings were fragile. Beachheads could have been rolled back. Supply lines could have been severed. The invasion could have stalled. That moment passed. Not because German soldiers failed to fight, but because German command failed to act. By the time certainty replaced belief, it was too late. Operation Fortitude is often described as a clever trick. That description misses the point. Fortitude did not win the war by deception alone. It bought time, and time was the single resource the Allies could not replace on the beaches of Normandy. Measuring success in days, not drama. Fortitude's impact is best measured in delays. German panzer divisions that could have reached Normandy within 24 to 48 hours were held back. Some units remained in the Pas-de-Calais region for weeks. Others were released too late to affect the outcome. This delay mattered more than numbers. In the first days after D-Day, Allied beachheads were shallow, fragile, and dangerously exposed. Supply lines were vulnerable. Command and control was imperfect. A concentrated armored counterattack at this stage could have been decisive. Fortitude denied the Germans that opportunity. The counterattack that never came. German doctrine emphasized rapid counterattack against amphibious landings. This doctrine was sound. It had worked before. What Fortitude did was prevent doctrine from being executed. Orders were delayed. Requests were debated. Units were held in reserve. By the time armored forces engaged in strength, Allied positions had solidified. Airfields were operational. Artillery was ashore. Logistics flowed continuously. The invasion had passed its most vulnerable phase. Lives saved by absence. It is impossible to calculate precisely how many lives Fortitude saved. What can be said with confidence is this: every German division held back from Normandy reduced pressure on Allied troops during the critical early phase. Less pressure meant fewer breakthroughs. Fewer breakthroughs meant fewer massacres on the beaches. The absence of certain German units mattered as much as the presence of Allied ones. Strategic momentum and irreversibility. Once the Allies achieved operational momentum, the campaign became irreversible. Ports were captured or improvised. Supply chains expanded inland. German defenses were stretched beyond recovery. Fortitude did not win Normandy alone. But without Fortitude, Normandy might never have been won at all. Why, this was not luck. Fortitude's success was not accidental. It was the product of long-term intelligence control, institutional discipline, respect for the enemy's reasoning process. The Allies did not underestimate German intelligence. They studied it. They shaped it. That difference mattered. The limits of deception. It is important to be clear. Fortitude did not immobilize the German army indefinitely. It did not prevent resistance. It did not guarantee victory. What it did was create a window of advantage. That window was exploited ruthlessly. Deception alone does not win wars. Deception that creates exploitable conditions does. Operation Fortitude has been simplified by time. Inflatable tanks became the symbol. Fake radio traffic became the punchline. The deeper mechanics were often ignored. This distortion is understandable. The truth is quieter. Myth 1. Fortitude was just clever props. False. Physical decoys mattered, but they were supporting actors. The core of Fortitude was intelligence control. Without trusted human sources, decoys would have meant nothing. Myth 2. The Germans were easily fooled. False. German intelligence operated within a logical framework. Fortitude succeeded because it reinforced that framework, not because it bypassed it. The Germans were not tricked. They were persuaded. Myth 3. Normandy alone won the war. False. Normandy was decisive, but only because it succeeded. Fortitude helped ensure that success. Had the invasion failed, Allied political and military credibility would have suffered irreparable damage. The real legacy of Fortitude. Fortitude demonstrated something uncomfortable. Modern warfare is not decided solely by force. It is decided by perception. By shaping what an enemy believes to be reasonable, likely, and urgent, it is possible to influence decisions at the highest level without firing a shot. This lesson has not been forgotten. It has been studied, refined, and applied ever since. The lie that saved Normandy. Operation Fortitude was not a single lie. It was a sustained narrative, told patiently, reinforced relentlessly, and believed completely. It did not destroy the German army. It prevented it from acting when action mattered most. That hesitation saved Normandy, and Normandy saved Western Europe.